In May of 1989, on the coast of Aichi Prefecture, the first production Lexus LS 400 rolled off a brand new assembly line at Toyota's Tahara plant. Line 4 had been built specifically for this car, dedicated entirely to the LS 400, and equipped with the industry's first production use of laser welding. It was surrounded by panel gap tolerances tighter than anything Toyota had ever shipped. 80 kilometers inland at Toyota's older Motomachi plant, a different car was finishing its life. The Toyota Cressida had been built there since 1976. By every measurable standard, it had already solved the problem of building a world-class luxury sedan with a Supra-derived engine, Mark III Supra suspension, and period road tests rating its fit and finish above the entry-level Mercedes 190e. It raised a simple question: why does a company perfect something and then decide to start over anyway? The answer isn't in the engineering record. The engineering record is clean. The answer is in something stranger. It is in the way Toyota used the Cressida itself to build the very car that would replace it. To understand that, you have to look at how both cars were developed inside the same company. The Cressida wasn't a one-generation experiment. By 1988, when the X80 generation arrived in North America, the nameplate had been running for 12 years and 4 previous generations. The first Cressida, the X30, had launched in the United States for the 1976 model year. Positioned as Toyota's premium sedan offering, at a moment when Japanese cars were still trying to convince American buyers that premium and Japanese could exist in the same sentence. Subsequent generations followed on a roughly 4-year cadence: X40 and X50 through 1980, X60 through 1984, X70 through 1987, and finally the X80 from 1988 to 1992. 5 generations, 16 years, a continuous evolution of Toyota's idea of what a luxury sedan should be. Across that span, the Cressida's positioning slowly shifted. The early generations were closer to upmarket commuters with broomy details, the velour interiors, the wood-grain wagon variants, the formal styling that nodded toward American luxury vocabulary of the late 1970s. By the X70 generation in the mid-1980s, the car had grown into something more serious, with independent rear suspension, more sophisticated electronics, and a tighter European reference in the way the suspension was tuned. The X80 in 1988 was the culmination of that trajectory. It was the generation where Toyota stopped looking sideways at American luxury and started looking directly at Munich. The commercial pressure behind that shift was specific. Through the second half of the 1980s, the Japanese yen appreciated dramatically against the US dollar. The Plaza Accord of 1985 had explicitly committed major economies to weakening the dollar, and the yen's resulting climb pushed every Japan-built export vehicle into a margin squeeze. Toyota's options were narrow: cut prices and accept lower margins, retreat from segments where exchange rates made profitability impossible, or load every car with so much additional content that higher dollar prices could be justified to American buyers as legitimate value. Toyota chose the third path almost universally, and the Cressida was one of the clearest examples. The standard equipment list grew. The interior materials became more substantial. A dual overhead cam inline-six replaced the older single overhead cam unit. The price climbed from where the X70 had been, but the value justification climbed faster. By 1988, a well-equipped Cressida sold for roughly $20,000 to $23,000, a real number for a Toyota, but one supported by a content level the company had never previously offered under its own badge. This is the context in which the X80 needs to be understood. It was not just the next generation of an existing nameplate. It was Toyota's most ambitious statement yet about what its brand could mean at the upper edge of its own price range. Built at the exact moment when the company was secretly preparing to launch a separate brand specifically to escape the ceiling that the Toyota name imposed. The connection between the Cressida and the Lexus LS 400 is more direct than most people realize, and it is documented in Toyota's own historical records. During the development of the Circle F project, the code name for what became the LS 400, with F standing for flagship, Toyota engineers needed somewhere to test interior concepts. The The LS400's body was not finalized yet, but the cabin work was already being prototyped. The solution was to build the prototype interiors inside Cressida bodies and use them as rolling test mules. This wasn't a marketing exercise, it was real engineering. Nakamichi audio systems were being calibrated for the LS400 inside Cressida cabins. The leather sourcing, the switchgear feel, the seat foam densities, the door card materials, all of it was being refined inside the X80's body shell, because that body shell was the closest thing Toyota had to the dimensional envelope the LS400 would eventually occupy. The Cressida was, in the most literal sense, the laboratory where the Lexus interior was developed. This explains something that might otherwise look coincidental. When the LS400 launched in September 1989, period reviewers noted how immediately mature it felt, how the cabin lacked the awkwardness of a first-generation luxury attempt. Part of that maturity was $1 billion of development capital and 1,400 engineers working for 6 years. But part of it was also that the interior had already been quietly tested, refined, and retested inside Cressida bodies for years before the LS400 ever existed as a finished vehicle. The Cressida was the proof of concept. The LS400 was what Toyota built once the proof had been established. There's a deeper irony in this arrangement. The Cressida wasn't just teaching Lexus how to build an interior, it was demonstrating something far more important to Toyota's product planners, that North American buyers would actually pay a premium for a Japanese sedan if the engineering was good enough. Without the Cressida's 16-year commercial track record, proving that buyers would walk into a Toyota dealership and write checks for upmarket sedans, the financial case for spending $1 billion to launch Lexus would have been impossible to make. The Cressida didn't just hand the LS400 its interior development. It handed the LS400 the very business case that justified its existence. To understand why the X80 was special, you have to look past the upholstery and open the hood. Tucked into the engine bay was the 7M GE, a 3-liter inline-six that shared its fundamental architecture with the contemporary Toyota Supra. This wasn't marketing badge engineering, it was the same engine, in the same basic state of tune, dropped into a sedan body. The Supra produced its versions of the engine for the A70 generation. The Cressida received the naturally aspirated version. Same block, same head, same DOHC valvetrain, same 190 horsepower output. That number sounds modest by modern standards. In 1989, it was formidable. American luxury sedans of the same era were still relying on pushrod V8s that produced similar power figures with twice the displacement and a fraction of the smoothness. European competitors were experimenting with V6 layouts that introduced vibration the inline-six fundamentally doesn't have. An inline-six is naturally balanced. The firing pulses cancel out across the crankshaft in a way no other common configuration matches. For a luxury buyer, that meant a steering wheel and a gear shifter that stayed perfectly still at idle and during slow cruising. The Cressida's engine note at highway speed was distant and refined. It felt mechanical without feeling busy. The 7M GE was paired exclusively with a 4-speed automatic in the North American X80 Cressida. Toyota dropped the manual transmission option that had been available on earlier Cressida generations. This was a deliberate market positioning choice. By 1989, the buyer Toyota was chasing for the Cressida wasn't a driving enthusiast looking to row gears. It was a luxury buyer who wanted the smoothness and the quiet, who valued the mechanical sophistication of a Supra-derived engine without wanting to interact with it through a clutch pedal. But every engineering decision carries a cost. The 7M GE inherited not just the Supra's smoothness, but also a specific weakness that would eventually define this engine's reputation in the used car market. It was not about metallurgy or thermal cycling or the usual explanations people reach for. It was simpler and worse than that. It was a number on an assembly line specification sheet that Toyota got wrong. The interior of the X80 Cressida was a calculated love letter to German luxury. Toyota's engineers had performed mechanical autopsies on the contemporary BMW 5 Series, the E28, and the newer E34, trying to understand exactly what made those cars feel the way they did. Why a German door closed with that specific muted thud. Why the steering felt connected to the road instead of floating above it. Why the dashboard plastics had a particular density and grain. They wanted to understand the language of European luxury well enough to speak it themselves. The competitive landscape Toyota was targeting had specific price coordinates. The BMW 5 Series sat at roughly $27,000 to $30,000. The Volvo 760 came in lower at $18,000 to $20,000. The Mercedes 190e hovered close to where the Cressida lived. Toyota's strategy was to deliver BMW-grade interior content at a price that undercut BMW by $7,000 to $10,000, while sitting comfortably above Volvo. The Cressida was not trying to be cheaper than the cheapest European luxury sedan. It was trying to be almost as good as the most expensive one for substantially less money. That value proposition depended entirely on whether the cabin actually delivered on the promise. The leather sourcing was the most visible expression of this ambition. In 1989, leather was a boundary line in the Toyota lineup. The Camry did not offer it. You could not walk into a Toyota showroom with a blank check and order leather in anything less than a Cressida. It was the marker that separated the mainstream from the elite, and the leather Toyota used was not the thin, plasticky hide that cheaper brands had started experimenting with. It was heavy, high-grade material with a substantial hand feel, designed to develop a patina across decades of use, rather than crack after 3 summers in the sun. This single equipment distinction told you everything about where the Cressida sat in Toyota's hierarchy. It was standard on the Cressida. It was unavailable on the Camry at any price, in any trim, with any option box checked. The line between mainstream Toyota and luxury Toyota was being drawn through the leather catalog before Lexus existed to formalize the separation. The suspension was where the engineering ambition got serious. The MX83 used a McPherson strut front end paired with a multi-link independent rear derived from the contemporary MK3 Supra. That was the key technical handoff. The Cressida was not sitting on a generic sedan platform. It was sitting on hardware adapted directly from Toyota's flagship sports car. The rear geometry gave the car a level of cornering composure that period road testers consistently noted as exceptional for a luxury sedan, particularly one carrying as much sound deadening and interior weight as the Cressida did. Period road tests from the major American automotive magazines confirmed Toyota had hit the mark. When Car and Driver and Motor Trend put the X80 against the Mercedes 190e, the journalists did not just find the Cressida competitive, they often rated its fit and finish as superior to the entry-level Benz. Panel gaps were tighter. Interior plastics felt more substantial. The Mercedes switchgear, by the late 1980s, had started to develop the hollow-feeling brittleness that would dog Mercedes' interior quality for the next decade. The Cressida had no such problems. It felt like it was built by people who genuinely cared whether you noticed the difference. This is the moment where the tragedy starts to become visible. By proving Toyota could build a car that competed mechanically and tactilely with a BMW for thousands of dollars less, the Cressida had accidentally created a ceiling for its own brand. The X80 was the evidence that the market wanted a Japanese flagship. It was also the evidence that the Toyota badge carried a specific price limit that no amount of engineering could push past. To go any higher in the luxury market, Toyota needed a new name, a new dealership experience, and a new price floor. The Cressida had benchmarked the Bavarian so successfully that it had benchmarked itself out of a future. Every legend has a weakness, and the 7MGE had one specific failure mode that became central to how the engine is remembered. The story of how it happened is more interesting than the rumors that grew up around it. The actual cause was simple and embarrassing. Toyota specified the head bolt torque in the 7MGE assembly line at approximately 58 pound-feet, a figure that turned out to be roughly 20 to 30 pound-feet too low for the engine's long-term sealing requirements. The factory torque was insufficient to keep the head gasket adequately compressed across thousands of thermal cycles. As the engine accumulated mileage, the gasket would gradually lose its seal, eventually failing at the fire rings around the combustion chambers. Coolant would seep into the cylinders. Compression would drop. The engine would start running rough, then start overheating, then start consuming coolant at a rate that demanded a head gasket job costing $1,500 to $2,500. Toyota knew. After the failures became widespread enough to attract attention, Toyota quietly issued a service bulletin recommending higher torque values on subsequent assembly. They never recalled the affected vehicles. They never told existing owners. They simply revised the spec sheet for new production and let the cars that had already been built work through the failure rate at the owner's expense. The numbers from the long-term Cressida and Supra owner communities are stark. By 100,000 miles, roughly 30% of 7M GE engines have blown a head gasket. By 150,000 miles, the figure is closer to 70%. By 200,000 miles, it is nearly universal. This applies to the naturally aspirated 7M GE in the Cressida, just as much as to the turbocharged 7M GTE in the Supra. The earlier popular wisdom that the Cressida's lower thermal loads protected it from the Supra's failure rate turned out not to be true. The Cressida failed at almost the same rate. The bolts were under-torqued the same amount, and the gasket did not care whether it was sitting under a turbo or breathing naturally. It just slowly worked itself loose either way. The remarkable thing about this failure mode is how completely it can be eliminated. Owners who pulled the head bolts and retorqued them to roughly 75 pound-feet, the value that should have been specified at the factory, almost never blew a head gasket again. The engine's underlying architecture was sound, the block was rigid, the internal components were overbuilt and durable, the valvetrain was reliable. The only thing wrong with the 7M GE was a number on Toyota's assembly line documentation, and that number could be fixed in an afternoon by anyone with a torque wrench and the willingness to remove the valve cover and retension the bolts. There is a particular sting to this failure mode in the context of the larger story. The Cressida was built at Motomaki by workers who took enormous pride in their assembly precision. The interior development was being used to prototype the Lexus LS 400's cabin. Toyota was, at the same time, building the Tahara plant's reputation for the most precise panel gaps in the industry. And inside the Cressida's engine bay, the head bolts had been tightened to the wrong specification, a clerical error in the assembly documentation that would eventually doom hundreds of thousands of these engines because Toyota chose not to publicly acknowledge the mistake. The car that was good enough to define the future of Japanese luxury also carried a documented assembly spec defect, one the company knew about and quietly walked away from. The Cressida that North American buyers knew was only one face of a much larger family. In Japan, the X80 platform spawned three siblings, the Mark II, the Chaser, and the Cresta, that together dominated Toyota's executive sedan market through the late 1980s and into the 1990s. The name Cressida itself was an export invention, derived from the lead character in Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, and used because Toyota wanted a name with Western literary weight for international markets. If you walked into a Toyota dealership in Tokyo in 1989, you would not find a single car badged Cressida. The domestic version was the Mark II, and it carried a heritage stretching back to the 1968 Corona Mark II. The three siblings shared the same platform, but were positioned differently. The Mark II was the conservative choice, with restrained styling aimed at the senior executive who valued dignified presence. The Chaser was the athletic brother, offering more aggressive bodywork and a firmer suspension calibration, aimed at the younger professional who wanted some edge in his luxury sedan. The Cresta leaned formal, with hardtop styling and trim choices that appealed to upper management buyers. Underneath the different sheet metal, all three shared the same over-engineered platform and the same rear-wheel drive architecture that made the export Cressida so impressive. The Japanese market also got engine options that North America never saw. The 1JZ GTE twin-turbocharged 2.5-liter inline-six arrived in 1990, slotted into the Mark II, the Chaser, and the Cresta family, and immediately became one of the most beloved tuner engines of the decade. North American Cressida buyers were limited to the 7MGE. Japanese Mark II buyers could specify a turbocharged 2.5-liter engine with hundreds of horsepower of tuning headroom, factory, installed in the same body shell that was being marketed in the United States as a sedate luxury commuter. This dual identity created the cult status the platform now enjoys in the global drift and tuner communities. The X80 became the perfect canvas, with a rear-wheel drive layout, robust transmission options, easy engine swaps because so much of the Supra DNA was already there, and a cabin that did not telegraph any of the chassis's actual capabilities. A clean X83 Cressida in the United States looks like a grandfather car. The same platform in Japan, with a 1-edge AZ swap and adjustable coilovers, became one of the defining drift platforms of the 2000s. That dual personality is what makes the platform fascinating in retrospect. The same sheet metal used to ferry executives to meetings in Midtown Manhattan was also used to throw tire smoke across mountain passes outside Osaka. Toyota built one car with two completely different personalities, and the rigid brand boxes that the Lexus launch required could not accommodate both. The Cressida had to become one thing: quiet, formal, finished. The parts of the platform that made it interesting were exiled to Japan, only specifications that North American buyers would not see for 2 more decades. The decision to discontinue the Cressida was not really about the Cressida at all. It was about the architecture of Toyota's North American luxury strategy, and what that architecture required to function. When Lexus launched in September 1989, it did not arrive as a single product. It arrived as a channel, a complete dealership network, a separate brand identity, a service standard explicitly modeled on 5-star hospitality, and 2 very different vehicles positioned to capture distinct slices of the luxury market. The LS 400 sat at the top, rear-wheel drive, an all-aluminum 1 UZFEV8 engine, and a $35,000 entry price, aimed directly at the Mercedes E-Class and the BMW 5 Series. The ES 250 sat below it, a rebadged Toyota Camry, prominent at a lower price point, designed to give Lexus showrooms an entry-level product that could pull buyers into the brand. By 1992, the ES 250 had been replaced by the ES 300, a reskinned X510 Camry with a V6 priced at roughly $23,000 to $26,000, sitting almost exactly where the Cressida had been sitting since 1988. That overlap was the entire problem. With the ES 300 occupying the Cressida's price band through the Lexus channel, the Cressida had nowhere left to live inside Toyota's product hierarchy. Keeping it in production would have meant Toyota was selling 2 competing luxury sedans at the same price point through 2 different dealership networks, one with a Toyota badge and one with a Lexus badge, both built in Aichi, both targeting the same buyer. The brand confusion would have been immediate and corrosive. Lexus dealers would have been undermined every time a customer realized they could buy a similar car with similar equipment for less money down the street at the Toyota store. The decision was not dramatic. It was inventory management. The Cressida's $20,000 slot in the market was assigned to the Lexus channel. The Cressida nameplate was retired, and Toyota's own showrooms were left with a permanent gap between the Camry at the top of the mainstream lineup and the entry-level Lexus across the brand boundary. That gap stayed open for 3 years. In 1995, Toyota launched the Avalon, a front-wheel drive sedan built in Kentucky, sharing its platform with the Camry, designed to fill the space the Cressida had vacated without recreating the brand hierarchy problem the Cressida had caused. The Avalon was bigger, more spacious, more conservative, and aimed at a completely different buyer than the Cressida had served. It was the flagship that did not threaten Lexus, because nothing about it made anyone want to drive a BMW. What's most interesting about the Cressida to Lexus transition is not the channel management. It's how cleanly the engineering DNA flowed from one to the other once you know where to look. The 7MGE was Toyota's most advanced production engine in 1988, It was DOHC, 4 valves per cylinder, with electronic fuel injection, EFI, an iron block paired with an aluminum head for the best balance of dimensional stability and weight reduction that the era's metallurgy allowed. 18 months later, the LS400 launched with the 1UZFE, still DOHC, still 4 valves per cylinder, still EFI, but now an all-aluminum V8 designed from a clean sheet to be the most refined engine Toyota had ever produced. The 1UZFE was not an evolution of the 7MGE in the literal sense. It shared no parts and used a completely different architecture, but it was an evolution in philosophy. Every engineering ambition that had gone into the 7MGE got escalated and refined for the LS400's V8. The valve geometry, the intake design, the combustion chamber shape, and the pursuit of an engine you could not hear at idle and could not feel through the steering column at any speed. The 7MGE was the rough draft. The 1UZFE was the finished version, dressed up in the badge that could finally charge what the engineering was actually worth. The same pattern shows up in the cabin. The leather sourcing protocols Toyota developed for the Cressida fed directly into the LS400's interior specification. The tactile standards Toyota applied to the Cressida's switchgear became the baseline that Lexus then exceeded. The Nakamichi audio calibrations that started life inside Cressida bodies ended up in production LS400s. The 1992 XD10 Camry, the car that shocked the industry with build quality nobody thought was possible at a Camry's price, was downstream of all the same manufacturing discipline. Wikipedia's account of the Lexus LS development cites the Cressida explicitly as the first glimpse of what the LS400 and the next generation Camry would become. The engineering tradition did not die with the Cressida. It just got moved to a different floor of the building with a different sign on the door, and the workers who had spent 16 years building Cressidas at Motomachi never got formal credit for what their work had taught the company. The final North American Cressida came off the line at Motomachi in 1992. Toyota did not issue a press release. There was no commemorative final edition, no gold badges, no special paint codes, no magazine retrospective. After 16 years and 5 generations, the nameplate that had introduced American buyers to Japanese luxury sedans simply stopped appearing in showrooms. Acknowledging the end would have meant acknowledging what was being given up, and Toyota's communications strategy was specifically focused on getting buyers to look forward at Lexus, rather than backward at what Toyota had been quietly perfecting for over a decade. The absence of a farewell is itself the documentation. A manufacturer that wanted to mark the moment would have said something. Toyota chose silence because silence was strategy. The Cressida's quiet retirement let the company control the narrative completely. There was no obituary, no lap of honor, no photograph of the last car rolling off the line. The Cressida did not end so much as it was edited out, the way a publisher might quietly let an old title go out of print when a more profitable book takes its slot on the warehouse shelf. For collectors today, that silence has aged into a particular kind of value. Clean X83 Cressidas are time capsules. From the moment when Toyota was willing to build a sedan that was better than it strictly needed to be, when engineering ambition was allowed to outrun marketing strategy, before brand hierarchy locked everything into its assigned price tier. The cars trade in the $5,000 to $12,000 range, depending on condition and whether the head gasket has been properly addressed. That is a fraction of what an early LS400 in similar condition commands. Despite the two cars sharing significant DNA, the same 6-year development arc, the same Aichi prefecture origin, and the same fundamental engineering ambition. The badge made the difference. It always does. Toyota understood something profound about the American luxury market in 1988. They understood that there was real hunger for engineering substance underneath a premium experience. The Cressida proved the hunger existed. Lexus was the channel built to monetize it at higher margins. The Cressida was the laboratory. The LS400 was the product. After 1992, the rule was permanent. You could have Japanese luxury engineering, or you could have a Toyota badge, but you could not have both anymore. That boundary held for more than 30 years. 3 years later, in 1995, Toyota launched a different kind of flagship. It was built in Kentucky instead of Japan. It had more interior space than a police cruiser in a smaller, more efficient package. It traded rear-wheel drive balance for front-wheel drive packaging, and a flat floor that created an unusual sense of cabin spaciousness. Toyota believed they had learned something from what happened to the Cressida. Click on this video to see what happened to that car. Learn why Toyota's next luxury bet took a completely different path.